Hey guys, welcome back to RevAtlas. I'm Sandeep and you're watching the camera review of the OnePlus Nord, which did take a fair bit of time since we got the device late, but we still wanted to do a detailed camera review, and here it is finally. And before we get this started, please do make sure to hit the subscribe button and also turn on notifications for more videos like this. Now let's begin the video. So let's start by talking about the specifications. You get a primary Sony IMX586 sensor with an aperture of f1.75, optical image stabilization, and 48 megapixels of resolution. You also get three other cameras in the form of an 8 megapixel f2.25 ultra wide angle camera with 119-degree field of view, a 2 megapixel macro camera, and an aperture of f2.4, which is also carried over to the depth sensor, which has an aperture of the same value but a 5 megapixel resolution. So let us start by talking about the image quality. In terms of dynamic range, the OnePlus Nord does very well with great exposure and details captured in both the shadows as well as highlights, and it also manages to keep both in check without overblowing the highlights nor underexposing the shadows. In terms of sharpness and detailing, the Nord is not all that great, and this is evident when you pixel peep, as the details seem to be drowned out by the excessive noise reduction. Now, if you actually look at even the foliage that is captured, you'll also see a watercolor sort of effect, which is again the result of excessive noise reduction and softness being applied in order to hide the noise that the camera produces. By default, the Nord captures images in 12 megapixels of resolution with pixel binning, but you can also capture it in 48 megapixels of resolution, but the resulting files are around 2 to 3 times larger without much of an improvement in terms of the sharpness or detail, but you also get more amount of noise, so we suggest sticking to 12 megapixel mode. Now coming to the ultra wide angle camera, it has much of the same characteristics as the regular camera, but with a cooler color temperature most of the time. You'll get good dynamic range and good colors overall, but here too the overall detail and sharpness is really lacking, and this is much more evident when you pixel peep, and you can see a lot of the things look very blotchy.
One useful feature I found on Nord is the fact that the phone remembers which camera you're shooting from. For example, right now it's in the 1x mode, and generally when I shift to the Nightscape mode in most other phones, it changes the lens that's being used. So in this particular case, I'm going to go on to 0.6x, which is the ultra wide angle camera using Nightscape, and if I go to photo, it still resumes with that camera. Now this is very useful because generally if you are say in 0.6x in photo mode and you suddenly decide, okay, the photo is not bright enough, or I actually need to make use of night mode for this, you click the Nightscape mode and generally it goes to 1x. This happens on many phones, most phones in fact, and this way it's a small feature but one that I personally found useful, because rather than going into 1x and again switching to this, it perfectly makes sense to directly jump into that particular setting.
Now let's talk about low light photography, and we'll start with the primary sensor, which we expected to give good results considering the large aperture size as well as the large sensor size. Now moving on to the low light photography mode, and we'll start with the primary camera, which we did expect to do quite well considering the fact that it has a large sensor, a pretty large aperture, as well as optical image stabilization. By default, the photos are not very impressive as they are underexposed, high levels of noise, and are often accompanied with shakes as well. Now when you use the Nightscape mode, you get much better results, especially in terms of the overall exposure, which is now acceptable, and you also get much better detail from the shadow region, which was otherwise underexposed. However, there is a shortcoming here in the form of softness. If you examine the details on the leaves, you will see that there's hardly any sharpness and the entire thing looks very soft. Now I'll definitely admit that the entire image looks much better than without using the Nightscape mode, but however it's not technically all that great when you actually zoom in and examine all the details. Now moving on to the ultra wide angle camera, similar findings are here as well, and the ultra wide angle camera really needs to be used in Nightscape mode all the time when you're doing low light photography, but then again the results are not all that impressive, and we'd suggest actually using the primary camera whenever possible unless you have no other option. In instances with good lighting but artificial lighting, it does much better, and you don't see most of the faults that is there with low light, for example. Moving to the portrait mode, the phone does very well in good lighting conditions with good edge detection and blurring, and the overall image looks pretty good. However, in more complicated lighting conditions and more intricate backgrounds, you will notice that the edge detection fails quite a bit, and this is evident in such examples such as these. However, the main issue here is the fact that there is a lot of softness to the portion in focus even, and the images also tend to have higher levels of noise than expected. Coming to the macro camera, the results are not all that great, and 2 megapixels of resolution is also not enough to provide sufficient detail and sharpness, and there's also an issue in terms of white balance. While some may enjoy using a macro camera, I feel it would have been beneficial at least if they gave the 5 megapixel resolution to the macro camera instead of giving that to a depth sensor, considering that the depth mapping is still all not that great with the 5 megapixel sensor. In most instances, you're better off using the OnePlus Nord's primary camera itself and then cropping it later, and you'll get better results than using the macro camera. Coming to the front-facing cameras, you get a camera cutout in the display which houses 2 different sensors. The first is a Sony IMX616 32 megapixel sensor with f2.45 aperture, and this is fixed focus, as well as the ultra-wide angle camera which is an 8 megapixel unit with f2.45 aperture as well. Performance from these cameras are quite inconsistent to say the least, especially because they vary a lot in terms of the overall exposure. In these particular photos where we shot stuff inside with good lighting, it did very well, but you also see some softness to it. However, outside when we went on a cloudy day, for example, which was overcast, you notice that the phone actually overexposed the photo and gave very washed out colors. Now there is fair amount of detail and sharpness, but there seems to be some sort of a beauty mode being applied even when you have it disabled all the way. I'm not sure what is happening here exactly, but I feel that the hardware can achieve much better results, but there is need for more tuning from both these cameras. Portrait mode remains a similar story here as well. Like the back camera, there is an inherent softness to this, and the edge detection is decent at times, but at times it actually gets a lot of the things wrong. The OnePlus Nord also has raw image capture in the Pro mode, which obviously gives you much better quality photos in case you know how to process the images yourself, but note that this is limited only to the primary camera and you cannot use it with the ultra wide angle camera.
So in the Pro mode you have the option for RAW or JPEG 48 megapixel, but you also have this custom setting where you can actually save different presets, say the white balance, the shutter speed, etc., and you can actually save that as a preset, and you have totally of 2 different presets that you can easily toggle in order to make the settings that you want.
Coming to the video modes, you actually get a maximum resolution of 4K up to 30 FPS with both the primary as well as ultra wide angle cameras. Now it's worth noting that both these modes actually record very good video in terms of the overall bitrate, sharpness, quality, etc., and is very similar to what you get from the flagship series of OnePlus devices, and video recording has always been a strong suit of OnePlus devices, and the Nord is no different. However, one unusual thing that we found is the fact that the front-facing camera can record up to 4K 60 FPS, albeit without EIS, while the rear cameras can only do up to 4K 30 FPS. What additionally you get with the rear camera is basically a 4K Cine 30 FPS, which is basically a 21:9 aspect ratio video, which also has EIS, and the EIS is great, by the way, since we even tested the super stable mode and you can see just how well it works, and super stable as well as time-lapse modes supports a maximum of 4K 30 FPS as well. The front-facing camera is good in terms of the overall quality as well, but there is an issue in terms of dynamic range where we felt that the highlights in particular were often overexposed.
Hey guys, this is Sandeep from RevAtlas, and this is the front-facing camera on the OnePlus Nord capturing 4K 30 FPS video. Let me know what you guys think about the overall sharpness, dynamic range, how well is picking up my voice in this scenario, and the stabilization as well. Hey guys, this is Sandeep from RevAtlas, and this is the front-facing camera on the OnePlus Nord capturing 4K 60 FPS video. Let me know what you guys think about the overall sharpness, dynamic range, how well is picking up my voice in this scenario, and the overall stabilization as well.
Now coming to slow motion videos, the Nord can capture very good slow motion videos, and the overall quality is pretty good as well, albeit in 1080p, but it's one of the best slow motion cameras that we have tried, especially in this particular price point.
So this is with super stable mode on. This is with super stable off.
Now we also tested the stock camera to a gcam mod, but to be honest the results were not all that impressive, and while in some instances you did get better quality photos, in some other instances we found that the stock camera, which itself was not all that great, was producing better images. Now the reason for this could be the fact that the gcam was not particularly tuned for the Nord, and we hope that a specific version of gcam that's tuned for the Nord does come out soon, but until then it seems like the stock camera itself is the better option to go for, since it has more consistent results than the Google camera app itself. To conclude, the OnePlus Nord seems to be on par with the other offerings from the brand, especially in terms of the video mode, thanks to the high quality footage which also has great stabilization. However, when it comes to the cameras, both at the front and back, in terms of image quality, there is a lot that needs to be improved, especially in terms of the software processing. While you still get good quality photos from the primary camera for the most part, zooming in and actually pixel peeping will reveal the flaws that are there in the photos themselves. The wide angle camera again has similar set of flaws, and to be honest, the depth sensor nor macro camera are all that useful. So I feel the OnePlus really needs to tweak their software processing by a huge margin in order to make the Nord camera much better than it is currently. Thanks for watching this video. If you have any questions, do let me know in the comment section below, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button.